Yeah, we talked to Johan Hari during our podcast, who's a foremost expert on addiction, services and treatment, and wrote a great book called Chasing the Scream. He talks about kind of that comparison between, methadone and other medically assisted treatments like, heroin assisted treatments that they've shown have wild success in Europe and Switzerland. And you see people actually are able to, recover, able to establish lives and jobs and have some value and quality in their lives when compared to randomized trials against methadone. From everything that I've heard about methadone is essentially you're just transferring one addiction to another.
Don't Hide the Scars, a weekly podcast focused on addiction and recovery. Created by the nonprofit PAIN, Parents and Addicts in Need, and founded by Flindt Andersen.
Welcoming to Don't Hide the Scars, Greg Glod. Thank you for joining. Founder of Parents and Addicts in Need, Flindt Andersen, and myself, Jason LaChance.
Thanks, Flindt. Thanks, Jason, for having me.
You bet. Absolutely. Let people in on Greg's background. Of course, the co-host of The War on Drugs with Clayton English. You may know him from Last Comic Standing. Awesome dude. But also, of course, Greg, you are a criminal justice reform expert. And so that's kind of some of the areas we're going to go, especially you're doing so much in the space that we are in.
Right.
And seeing this stuff firsthand.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, our podcast kind of stems from, Clayton has this lived experience. A lot of his routine and material dives into kind of, experience that he had in kind of a funny light, either with the war on drugs, policing, things like that. And I'm kind of the policy nerd. And together we make a weird buddy cop style podcast here, the black dude from the inner city and the white guy from the suburbs who had a cop as a dad, and kind of tackling this issue where we kind of seen it from different angles, that the war on drugs has been a failed, social experiment that the United States and the rest of the world has been, dealing with for decades now. And it's time for a change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the interesting thing that brings to light, and we do shed on from time to time when we talk that war on drugs, and yes, it failed a long time ago, people, but we're literally talking about a war. And at the end of a lot of war, there's some price tags, and out of that, people that are making a shit ton of money. There's no other way to put it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. When you start to peel back the layers and where this origin story really comes from, the drug war, going back even into the 1920s, right after Prohibition, you had all these officers that were, used to try to enforce, prohibition laws. And you had an agency essentially that had nothing to do. And you said, all right, how do we keep the lights on here? And so you we need another victim, we need another war casualty, we need some villain out there to propagate. And so couldn't really deal with like murder, couldn't really deal with other things that were like state and local issues, but drugs, those are transported across state line. That's something that we can do. And so you start to vilify these drugs. You start calling cannabis marijuana because it sounds more Hispanic. And so you're able to kind of, start to say like, oh, this devil's lettuce is coming from Mexico and turning your children crazy. And so now you're able to actually, profit off of war. You're able to continue to expand and hire officers and give salaries and do all these things. And you see that type of origin that people are making money off of it. And every single time that a new drug or some new enemy comes up, it's the same type of thing. It's the fear mongering, it's the propaganda, and it's the villainizing of the people that use these drugs, the people that are addicts. And we've been villainizing people that have been struggling with addiction for decades rather than trying to help lift them out of it to justify this war that we've been continuing to wage. And so that's the major issue. We're making this a criminal justice war issue rather than a healthcare issue. And so that's a lot of the stuff that we try to expose in the podcast, going throughout the decades and different, social areas as well.
Do you guys, Greg, tackle the insurance issue at all?
Not as much on insurance, a little bit more on healthcare, but that's definitely something that's a problem where, folks can't get the right treatment and things like that, where essentially kind of like your lot in life depends on if you're able to get treatment, addiction recovery services, some of that economic aspects of it, where people just are completely left out of that. The only time they're actually able to get addiction services, the very minimal times, is when they actually have been arrested or have to go through the criminal justice system. And maybe, just maybe, they can get something else. But on the outside, it's, very impossible for a lot of people in a lower socioeconomic status. But love to hear your all's thoughts on that. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, look, there's two types of people out there, basically. The ones, at least in my world, that they either have the PPO insurance, and we can talk about that because that's not as good as everybody thinks it is. And then you've got the Medi-Cal side of this, that they have that lower insurance, that they don't pay anything to the treatment centers. We can't even take it because they're not paying us enough to even cover our food costs for a day. But where we're failing with the most of these people that have the Medi-Cal insurance or the government assisted insurance is that we don't have the proper treatment centers to send them. You made a statement saying, those people can get treatment through, after being arrested, but they're sent to these places that, for the lack of a better term, are toilet bowls. Right. And normally they become better addicts, better criminals coming out of the place. There's no follow-up. There's no outpatient services. There's no even proper detox methods in a lot of these places. And then, of course, you have the treatment centers that, and again, God bless them, the Salvation Armies of the world, the Teen Challenges of the world. But none of those places detox with medications. And you cannot detox in particular, well, anybody, whether it's alcohol, opioids, methamphetamine, cocaine, you have to be able to medically detox people. If not, they're going to run out of the place, or they may gut it out for a while, but that chance of relapse increases significantly when you are not properly detoxed. It's just a fact. People don't get it. That especially with opioid addicts, it takes 30 days just to get the drug out of one's system. Right. Opioids remove our dopamine. They remove serotonin. They cut our maturity level in half, which again is not a medical scientific fact, but that's what happens.
Well, some of our behavior would show.
Right. Yeah. And so how do we expect as a society to help people when we're teasing them? We're just saying, hey, come on in. We're going to make $30,000 a month off of you. All right. And then we have to cut them loose because the insurance company, whether it's a PPO or not, they're telling us we got to get that client out of there. Until we change the treatment system, until we change insurance companies and actually having insurance companies help us, I still think we're completely screwed, in my opinion.
Yeah, and actually, you kind of look at the data in those government, they have these kind of intermediate, sanctions facilities or recovery services or facilities. Those places have some of the highest recidivism rates of places because, like you said, it's detox without the proper care and treatment that we know recovery services, because either, bandwidth issues, money, it's all these things that don't allow it to actually be of quality. We spoke to a woman who's working in the Portland area, kind of helping with some of the addiction issues there and kind of the Oregon decriminalization experiment. And she struggled with her own addiction, and she thought that she was going to go there and actually get some sort of medically assisted treatment to detox off of heroin. She said, I've done enough. I've done enough stealing. I've had to do all these things. I'm tired. I'm done. I really want help. And she turned herself in, more or less. And they said, go sit in that corner. She was in a cage with 20 other people and essentially just had to detox out there on her own, on concrete. And just, right. Her story is not unique. It's all across the country. So I think you're exactly right. I mean, those types of actual quality services that have come through criminals are very few and far between. And then it's a huge problem.
New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised, top-quality care with programs for detox, inpatient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living, support groups, and more. With 50-plus years of combined experience and sobriety, Flindt Andersen and Thelma Gatlin Wilson provide adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect, and a safe, comfortable environment. To begin the process of recovery, to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction, call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
What they might do in a jail is they might give somebody a few days of a methadone cocktail, to help them get through the, through the first few days of this thing. But usually what that does is then when they release that person, they will go to that methadone clinic. And then that's a whole nother topic that just sticks up my ass. All right. Because methadone is the world's worst drug, plain and simple. Took me 2 years to get off of it. It's a nightmare. and again, I'm kind of interested in getting your opinion on long-term harm reduction.
Yeah, we talked to Johan Hari during our podcast, who's a foremost expert on addiction, services and treatment, and wrote a great book called Chasing the Scream. He talks about kind of that comparison between, methadone and other medically assisted treatments like, heroin assisted treatments that they've shown have wild success in Europe and Switzerland. And you see people actually are able to, recover, able to establish lives and jobs and have some value and quality in their lives when compared to randomized trials against methadone. From everything that I've heard about methadone is essentially you're just transferring one addiction to another, and you're transferring one problem to another. And it's really not, we just call one thing illegal and the other thing legal just to almost for no really reason whatsoever. It's very odd that we just decide what chemicals are wrong and what aren't. And so, no, I think that's a part of the answer, is that we're not open or politically, socially in this country to actually look at just kind of soberly what works and what doesn't, actually implement that. You see on one side, we got to lock everyone up and throw away the key. That's how we do it. Or on the other side, let's just allow for this to kind of go unfettered, and maybe we'll do some clean needle sites. We'll test for fentanyl. We'll have some Narcan and let you kind of continue to proliferate what you're doing. And until we actually say, listen, look what they did in Switzerland from a very conservative state that had a huge problem with crime and drug addiction. We actually started treating these people like human beings and having long-term medically assisted treatment. That was the only thing that actually made us safer, made these people actually move from a life of drug addiction to sobriety or some functionality. I don't know when we have the blueprint, we have the game plan, we just don't have the willpower to really implement a lot of these policies in the United States. And it's become so hyper politicized. I don't know how we get there. I really don't. I hope maybe this is why I came on, so if you all I could talk to some people, but it's dire right now. I totally agree.
Yeah, look, there's another side to that as well. So on one hand, we have to be able to provide those services for the addict, for their families, because this is a family issue as well. We have to be able to properly medicate them to get them through the detox. And we also, and I know people are going to yell and scream at me for this probably, but we have to be able to make it profitable for the treatment centers so they can keep their doors open. Look, in treatment today, I don't care what treatment center you own, the cost that is associated with running a treatment center, the laws by each state are so stringent that half the time you're worried more about keeping your doors open than you are worried about taking care of that client. And not really, but you know what I mean. It's just madness all over the place. And I don't know what the answer is. A lot of times I'll say, well, maybe, Biden's kid has to die from an overdose or something along those lines. And maybe that's where it has to get to. I don't know. Maybe one of Newsom's kids needs to have a fentanyl overdose, and God forbid, I don't want that. But is that what it's going to take for somebody to wake up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised the right point of what is it going to take to actually move through this, and changing incentives is going to be a major part of that. And what does that look like? Because right now, all the incentives are to continue to roll down the way on the criminal justice system, because so many grants are tied to amount of arrests that you do and prosecutions and all this stuff. And that's how you get money, or that's how you get elevated in your jobs. And so until you shift those incentives away from a criminal justice response to a healthcare response, to stay for health insurance, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And also it's going to be profitable for you. And this is how you make money, and this is how you thrive. Nothing's going to change. We live in a capitalist society, and this is how we are driven by incentives. A lot of times, with the drug war and everything else, we vilify this person or that person. It's all just human beings being driven by incentives all over the place. And how we still don't understand that aspect of it as well is very troubling to me too. People normally aren't going to do things just out of the goodness of their heart. We have to change the incentive model. And, unfortunately, a lot of the times we've seen, particularly in the drug war, you have these trigger points that exacerbate it. Maybe there are things that we will unfortunately see that will bring us out the other way. We talk about the Len Bias death in the 80s and how that was used as a trigger point to really start to see a lot of these mandatory minimums and longer drug sentences continue to come out through the Crime Control Act in 86. And it was because, Len Bias died, and they said this is a problem with crack. It actually was powder cocaine. It wasn't even crack cocaine, but they said that. But that's the propaganda that comes out of it. And one of the cruelest ironies of that is that one of his childhood friends was actually sentenced under the Len Bias drug laws. I'm sure that's not the legacy that Len Bias would like to lead. And so that's difficult. But that's the type of stuff. We have these trigger points, and I don't know what's going to take. We are seeing a little bit of a social change, I feel, with addiction, particularly with the opioid epidemic. Like we've talked about, that this wasn't an inner city issue. It got right in everyone's face. If you're in a rural community, suburban community, it wasn't some faceless addict in the throngs of Chicago. This was Tommy across the street that you've known since, that went to church school with your son, that was struggling. And so I think it brought a little bit more humanness and understanding to this issue. So you're seeing a little bit of that change, but there's such a lack of general understanding about what addiction is, what caused it, because of the amount of misinformation that we've had for years, intentionally by our government, law enforcement. It's going to take a long time for people to start really shifting their minds about what an addict is, how do you change that, and what that looks like. We have a long ways to go, but we've gone a long ways too.
Well, I think it's really, and I'm glad you brought up Johan Hari, because I reached out. Hopefully, maybe you can help us talk to him. Brilliant man, but also like Rat Park. I mean, what a wonderful experiment. Flindt, do you know about Rat Park? Greg, tell Flindt a little bit about Rat Park.
Sure. So a lot of our basis, our scientific evidence for addiction and what it is, was that it was chemical. It was all chemical. And essentially you could be the straight-laced person with a great family, the job, the dream house, everything, and you touch, marijuana or heroin one time and you are chemically hooked for the rest of your life. And obviously chemical dependence has an aspect to this as well, but they based this on an experiment where they put 2 bottles of water in a rat cage with one rat, one that had no cocaine in it, one that had cocaine in it. And the rat is stuck in a cage with nothing else going on. And they start going towards the cocaine water, and kept going there, continue until the rat eventually died. And for years, this was our basis for it's a chemical dependence. This is what a rat will do. Someone said in the 70s, well, geez, who wouldn't start doing cocaine in these types of situations if they're just locked in a cage like that? God's sakes, you got nothing else to do. Right. And so he created Rat Park, and Rat Park was a dreamland for rats. It had all the food they wanted, all the wheels they wanted, other rats to have sex with. It had everything you'd want if you're a rat. So it had the 2 waters again, one cocaine, one without cocaine. And they started going to the one without cocaine because there was other social interaction. There was value to their life beyond just sitting there in your solitude and nothingness and hopelessness that we've seen so many people. And that's really what drives addiction. Obviously, there's a chemical reaction to it, but it is the hopelessness that people have. It's the valueless that they see in their lives caused by, either, you see a lot of the times addiction increase when, the factory shuts down in some town and people start turning to other things. This is a huge aspect of it. And it's been really lost in our science and our policy that's a thing. We think that the threat of jail is going to stop you from doing this. That's completely wrong way of looking at it. It doesn't. We've seen this and we continue to do that. And so that's why I love Rat Park, because it does show that a lot of this is social. It's what's going on in people. And there's so many people that have these dual diagnoses between drug addiction and mental health issues and things like that all kind of exacerbate on each other. And the criminal justice system really heightens those things and makes them negative. I mean, I've gone through some female prisons before. I don't think I've ever talked to an inmate there that wasn't either had mental illness issues, either brought by physical or sexual abuse or some sort of drug addiction or both. I mean, it's what drives people to do these types of things is some sort of underlying thing. And so until we bring value and understanding and empathy and love to people that are going through addiction and try to find different routes, we're going to continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. And that's why I love that Rat Park experiment, to really kind of show that out there.
Yeah, it goes back to Appalachia back in the late 90s, middle to late 90s, when Purdue was out there, and they literally targeted Appalachia because the coal mines were shutting down. These people had nowhere to go, nothing to do. They were uneducated, not all of them, but for the most part, they're uneducated. And so, you had people, it was called the Oxycontin Express. It was going from Appalachia all the way down to Florida. And these people were driving down, driving back. I mean, if you've never seen the movie Dope Sick, you need to watch it.
I did. It was fantastic. Yeah, I really loved it. Yeah,
just fabulous, and it is so spot on, that movie. I can't even tell you how spot on that thing was. But you know, the other side of that is as well is not only does the social side have to do with this, the medical side has a lot to do with it. The doctors that are, and again, I'm not blaming doctors all the time here, but they don't want their patients in pain, so they are giving that medication to that kid that just tore his elbow because he's throwing too many pitches in a high school baseball game. You know, they are giving that to the dad that's got to have a back surgery or a knee surgery, whatever it is. And because people, again, don't understand how our minds work when it comes to loving that opioid. You either love that feeling, and this is what I've come across. You either love that feeling or you don't. Very few people, my wife is a perfect example, hates it, absolutely hates it, can't stand the feeling, it upsets her stomach. Plus she's got a recovering addict for a husband, so there you go. But all of a sudden, I mean, one of the statements, Greg, I hear from these kids is, I've seen God and I never want to not feel like this again. How the hell do you stop that? You can't.
Yeah. And I think in addition to that, Greg, you know, we talk a lot, gentleman that I recommend you speaking to at some point as well, Dr. Rob Kelly, brilliant mind for addiction, neuropsychologist and everything else. But that, you know, that trauma factor, like you're saying, in the thing in what Rat Park really illustrates for me is a thing that we preach here over and over and over. And that is the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connectivity. And so, like you said, you got connectivity, you feel a part of something, you feel that sense of purpose. And I think I'm an example of it. Flindt, you know, you as well in a different way. Flindt had a bunch of surgeries. He's like before you were even 10 years old, like right after you were born, you know, so you were getting medication to numb the pain right after you were born.
From day one. Yep.
Whereas mine was a sexual trauma, but we didn't talk about it. So I think unless we're encouraging more people to talk about what they're going through, what they're feeling, and find a way to be connected, and others have empathy, not sympathy, because I think sympathy is why we've got a little too much of the people out on the streets and just
agreed.
Like, let me just ignore you. Whatever. I'm letting you do your life, you know, and if you want to shoot up, whatever. Anyways, I think that's part of the area that we really need to be able to tackle.
No, I totally agree. I think it's a huge part of it. And I love that empathy to sympathy standard, because I do think people kind of take the two together and make it the same word, and it's not. I live here in Washington, D.C., and I see people shooting up heroin on the streets, and there's advocates that say they should be able to maintain that, and that's their right, and we shouldn't move them and do anything about it. And I don't understand when it's 10 degrees outside and they're outside and struggling with their lives, how this is empathetic at all. Throwing them in a cage is not empathetic either, but having this part of it where you just say they can live their lives, that's not empathy. It really isn't. It's not helping. If you're a father or a mother or something, you wouldn't allow your child to do that. You can't just be their friend. They want to eat ice cream for dinner, but you know better for them and you love them and you tell them no because of that. You tell them these are the right ways and help them guide through that. And we just don't understand that with drug addiction for some reason. Everything that we know about what raises a good human being and a family, we throw entirely out the window when it comes to addiction and people struggling with substance use. I truly don't understand it. And a lot of that is government misinformation for quite a long time. That as long as you can keep this stuff away from your kids completely, you're going to be fine. And, you know, jail's the way to do it. I really don't know. But no, I'm totally 100% agree with you, Jason.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call Parents and Addicts in Need at 559-579-1551 or check us out online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media at Pain Nonprofit. Please subscribe to the podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. To donate, please click the link in the description and help us save more lives gripped by addiction.
Well, look, when you've got well, you might not, but we certainly do. We've got a governor here that I'm going to post something later today that people are going to go, what the fuck? Okay. Because he posted it. This was back in 2019, but he's made other
2020
or 2020,
yeah.
but he's made some comments since. He literally is in front of everybody going, almost saying it's okay to self-medicate. It's okay. He said the greatest. How did he put it? The greatest.
I knew I should have pulled this video.
Oh God, I know it. I know it. The worst thing America ever did was promote being clean and sober.
Something along those
mm-hmm. lines. And you just go, what? I mean, but look, those people that are saying that it's okay and we shouldn't take them off this, and they don't truly know what that addict is going through. I can tell you from personal experience, the reasons why 99% of addicts don't get clean is because they are deathly afraid of the withdrawal symptoms. Number one, addiction is as much behavioral as it is a physical or psychological addiction. It's what we're used to doing. Getting up, when people get up to have their coffee in the morning, they get up at a certain time, they put 2 teaspoons of sugar in it. They read what's left of their morning paper. They watch a few minutes of Good Morning America. They have their second cup of coffee, and then they get up and go to work. They do that every day for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The addict is no different. We have our routines during from the minute we wake up from our passing out, because we don't sleep during this time. Okay. And so what? All of a sudden we're expected to change that habit that I did for 20 plus years at the drop of a hat. It doesn't work that way, but I guarantee you there are very few addicts out there that go, I want to live like a pig. Okay. I want to start putting gutter water in my syringe so I can inject the heroin. No, but none of us want that.
No one starts taking heroin to become an addict. I don't think anyone's ever said that before. Like, I want to be an addict. This is what I'm doing now. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, God, the guilt and shame that we live with is beyond what anybody could ever comprehend.
Right.
But we're afraid. We're afraid to get clean and sober because we don't know how to.
Yeah, and I remember. I think I saw that clip that he said something along the lines of, "Well, I like to have a glass of wine at the end of the evening to wind down too," or something like that. It's like, they talk about privilege all the time. Is there anything more privileged than saying that to a group of people that are struggling with addiction? I mean, for gosh sakes, man! It's just it's sickening, and it's a complete lack of awareness and education on this, and it just becomes political dogma at that point. Because the opposite of the criminal justice system is release, and so you start to say, like, we can't even agree on what the goals are to this population, let alone start to treat them effectively. And so, we can't even admit what the problem is. So if you're saying the first step to addiction, we're not past step 1 yet as a country. Right. And I think that's a huge problem too. I think there's half the country that vilifies individuals, and the other half just say, let's move on. I mean, there's a very small sector in the middle, and hopefully that's continue expanding with podcasts like this and more education. But no, it's a problem. We can't even agree what the problem is. It's nuts. Yeah.
Well, it's like you said, we just want to ignore it. We'll ignore it if they're on the streets, they're fine, or we're extra can ignore it if we just throw everybody in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Either way. Yeah. So you're locked up, we don't see them, they're on the streets, we can ignore them and place judgment. So it's just, and neither one is empathetic to it. I mean, I'm not saying, hey, every criminal doesn't deserve incarceration, because there's some that obviously really do, but we're talking about the user here. We're talking about that individual, and it's just, I don't know. It's sad. It's sad.
Yeah, no, it's beyond sad. But let's take another angle at this. Let's take the middle class to upper middle class to higher class person, right? Not the people that are doing jail time at all. What the world or the United States is not understanding now, in my opinion, we are so far past the awareness stage on this thing that to me, it's laughable. How many more billboards can we put up to say fentanyl kills, one pill kills, on and on and on? We had a young man in here that before the age of 19 wanted to be the Pablo Escobar of the fentanyl trade, and he was more than halfway there. And his buddies would use fentanyl underneath the billboard signs and laugh at the billboard signs.
Yeah.
All these kids, if I have to hear accidental overdose one more time, I'm going to throw up in my mouth. All right. Most of these are not accidents. Look, nobody wants to die, but when you are in your addiction, number one, even if you're not, these kids know exactly what they're taking. They know exactly what an M30 pill is. They know exactly what fentanyl does, and they're taking the chance anyway. And there's one reason for that, because the high is that good. And they're going to take that chance every single time, because kids obviously have that Superman t-shirt on. Nothing can happen to them. I'm not going to die. Greg, I have been to funerals where I have seen kids dealing fentanyl to their friends, almost like what we would do in our day if somebody passed, would go to a bar. Hey, one more for Frank.
Yeah.
You know, that's what these kids are doing at funerals.
Oh, no, that's fine. And yeah, I think that was something that was really eye-opening to me as we went through the podcast. We have an episode that we do on fentanyl, and we talked to an individual who, has walked the streets, talked on the stuff. And, he made the statement that heroin is not going to be around in the next couple of years. It's all fentanyl. Like, people don't realize, like, it's being requested, because it is stronger. And like you talked about, a lot of the times with addicts, this is the first social group that they've ever felt accepted into. And so there's a like a peer pressure thing, a social connection that they haven't experienced before. And it's just like you said, like, you joke around with your buddies about, like, oh, that one time in college when, Chris drank 30 beers at the tailgate and puked his way in, like, ha, ha, ha. It's really not too much different than, like you said, almost like joking around and doing this sort of stuff. It's just at a more aggressive standpoint. It's absolutely true. This is being requested to be on the streets. This is the drug of choice for a lot of people now. Heroin's not profitable anymore. People don't get the kind of the economy of drugs a lot of the time, where opioids require poppy fields. Cocaine requires coca fields. Methamphetamine, you can make it artificially, but the way of choice was ephedra and the ephedra plant. So they all require this tilling of soil, farmland, all this stuff. Methamphetamine, us three in a 8x10, cooking this, and now we're kingpins. I mean, and all we're doing again is saying that job well done, because we busted about 300 pills at the border, and we're coming through it, and this is it's laughable. And so people don't understand the economy of fentanyl and why this is going to be the drug of choice. And as people love the high of that, they're going to get more inclined to that. If you try to give someone just cut rate heroin on the streets now, they'd be like, this product's crap, I'm going to go to the other guy. And so that obviously always increases the potency, increases the intensity when you have anything that's prohibited. And so, no, I know that's happening, and not many people know that. I really, that's something that's not known. Yeah.
Well, even DEA has told me that we're not going to see heroin in the next 5 years. Heroin's going to be non-existent. And you gave the perfect explanation for it. But here's something, I don't know if you knew this or not, and this is from my connections with DEA. There are less than 5,000 DEA agents worldwide working the fentanyl epidemic.
Jeez.
That is frightening. And this guy is neck deep in it. Okay? He's neck deep in it. And it blows him away. When I heard that, I thought, no wonder. Now, when I hear war on drugs, I know we're never going to win that war on drugs. Somehow, some way, these cartels, these they're very, very intelligent people. They are going to figure it out. I don't even think we're going to educate our way out of this. I think a lot of this is human behavior. We want to escape for a while somewhere. But I am so shocked when I even have people in our industry that are saying we're wasting our time when we go after the drug dealer. We're wasting our time. We shouldn't even think about going to Mexico and attacking the cartels. We shouldn't even think about attacking China on this thing. In my opinion, we need to. You can't tell me that we, the United States, can't protect our borders. We're the strongest military in the world. We can shove a Scud missile up a camel's ass from 5,000 miles away. All right. But what? We can't protect, Tijuana coming over into California. Please somebody give me a break here.
Yeah. And you've kind of seen, you talked about kind of the cartels, everyone's always one step ahead of our kind of response to a lot of this stuff. And, you see as the opioid epidemic was going on, and during the Obama administration, you started to see the lawsuits and the crackdowns on the prescription of opiates. And now there's this market out there that essentially got their, drugs taken away, and they're looking for something else. And the cartels came in right at the right time for that. And the administration did not see this coming. And then during Trump, you saw him kind of put a little bit of pressure on China, where they were literally delivering fentanyl and its final product to Mexico, to the United States. And then they said, all right, we're not going to do that. Now it's the precursor chemicals that are coming through. And now they're setting up the hubs in Mexico to profit it over there. And it's always a step ahead. And like you said, until we put pressure on, supply side, fighting the supply side war exclusively, I think will always be a failure. But we need to start thinking about, it is a lot of the China coming in, dealing with Mexico and moving it through. And once the precursors are outlawed, it's going to be the precursors of the precursors. And those things are like Imodium and, things that are just everyday household items. And so they're always going to be a step ahead until we start kind of twisting where it actually hurts. China's as complicit in this as anyone. It's
absolutely.
It is. And, what we don't, and here comes the economics of this. COVID's, ravaging the Chinese economy. They're having, really difficult times right now, more than a lot of other people, because they continue to, kind of quarantine and things like that. The chemical industry there is one of the largest, parts of their economy. And so the Chinese government, one way or the other, is saying, probably not going to start cracking down on this right now. And also it's getting shipped out of our country, not staying in. And so we're not addicting our own people. There is a lot of things there that I think need to be raised. I just have not heard any really thing nationally about, like, this is the problem coming from a supply side. I don't know if you all can pinpoint anything, but I think our government has been, definitely quiet on this. And I think to your point that there's only 5,000 agents across the country working on this. That's a huge problem.
Yeah. Well, and not to let hey, COVID, whatever perspective you have, that's not what we talk about here, because I go on and on forever. But how many fucking commercials have we seen where they're showing the overdose death rate?
None.
Prior. All three of us know it was over 100,000 last year. 100,000 that we know of. That was calculated.
Right.
Nobody's talking about that. Why isn't this out here more? Like bring that out, because as we've adopted here, Flindt, tell the fucking truth.
That's it.
And that's the truth. Here's what it is. You've Flint's spoken tons of times. I've spoken at high schools and in classrooms, and questions that I get asked, and it's always like, yeah, I'm not, like, one kid, you're not telling us not to use drugs or pornography. And I'm like, I'm not telling you not to do anything. I'm telling you my story and where it goes and where others goes, because that's the truth. 100,000 plus. And it's like, why are we ignoring this? Why?
I think my answer is really, I think the folks that are suppressing this don't want that weaponized to, be justification for, punitive, problems, and say that what they're doing now in places is working. So why bring that out and be honest about it? Actually the drug war on both sides has had a major issue with essentially either suppressing or misinforming about the positives and the negatives of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
You actually see kind of going through with either LSD or MDMA and all these things that actually had potential benefits to treat PTSD and all this stuff. Never a lot of talk about, hey, you shouldn't do this in a recreational setting without understanding the risks of this sort of thing, and then something happens where, someone, freaks out or didn't know. And you see that even with marijuana, where we're like, it grows in the ground. It's cool. But you're going to a vape shop in California and everything that's in there is 90% THC, and a 18-year-old kid doesn't realize it could really mess up your head if you're not
Yeah.
understanding. And so there's a lot of suppression about the effects on that. And then on the other side too, about, you see the police officer that's on the ground, they're saying it's a fentanyl overdose. And then you ask experts like, well, none of this is aligned with a fentanyl overdose. And they chemically test them. It's like, no, it wasn't. But they're using that as propaganda to propagate something. So there's a lot of mistrust, I think, on both sides. And that's why the American people rarely get the truth on what this looks like.
Anything.
I'm totally with you. Yeah. And so we stopped looking at sources for this and kind of what our understanding is and what our dogma is on one side or the other. You just look at what kind of justifies your own, worldview. Again, this is not an issue just with the drug war. This is with everything with politics, but
Right.
it's a problem. We do this quite a bit. It's just suppress the truth, and it hurts us because now people are going to think, oh, if fentanyl's in the air, I'm going to die from this just by a speck. And it's not true. So now your friend who's potentially going to overdose, you don't want to touch them now because you think that you might get infected. It's just like, how many people do we think probably have died because of misinformation coming out about the risks to other people and fentanyl, not trying to treat them, or because you don't have a good Samaritan law or something else. It's so harmful in so many different ways, the misinformation. I wish they could just be honest with us and be, treat us like adults for once.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I get asked that all the time, especially from parents. Gosh, if he touches that pill, is he going to die? And I'm going, no. Okay. No, it has to be a pound of it. Okay. And it had to be caught in a fan somewhere. Okay. And
you have to be like a Boeing test site for engines for this. Yeah.
Exactly. But the other thing we're not talking about, and I'm not looking at my phone, I'm looking at my phone for a reason. Okay. Because I have this always in my notes because again, we're not even telling the truth about long-term harm reduction when it comes to opioid use, because I'll forget some of it. So that's why I'm going to read it, because I've had all these issues. Nobody's talking about what happens when an opiate user, let's don't even say abuser, let's say user, reaches the age of 55, 60 and up. Let me tell you something. Long-term opioid treatment increases the risk of fractures, infections, cardiovascular complications, sleep disordered breathing, bowel dysfunction. Not only that, it's called super tolerance, where the longer you take opioids, the pain comes back at you. So you are experiencing more pain because you're experiencing from the growth in your nerve endings. I've experienced every one of those. I have had 2 heart surgeries because of it. I have had my entire bowel system reconstructed because of the constipation that is so bad with it. Sleep disorder, my God, it took me 4 years after I got clean to even be able to sleep during the night. Breathing issues. The list, this is just a small list. It goes on and on, but you don't hear anybody talking about that stuff.
Never.
It's like, and I will say this, I'm all for short-term harm reduction, by the way. And what I mean by short-term is 2 weeks to 30 days. All right. That's about it. Anything over that, in my opinion, is long-term, because you become dependent on that other drug. You may not be in the addict behavioral mode yet, but you will become dependent on those drugs that everybody's talking about. And at some point, because the tolerance increases with every time you take something, you still want that high. You still want that feeling, and you're not getting it anymore. We're taking those medications to feel normal. Would we like the high? Yes. Do we love the high? Yes. So that's where the overdose comes into play, because we're going to take that chance to chase that high to a certain point. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I understand that. Yeah, clearly. Yeah. I think you let it right through it. Yeah.
Right. So again, why aren't the powers that be talking more about those? Again, misinformation. We're not giving the right information out there, and we can't even go in. Not that I'm everybody's grandpa now, so I can't even go into a high school and speak anymore, but they're telling everybody to soften your stories. That's Seriously, we have people all over the country that have gone into high schools. If I were asked, I wouldn't even go anymore, because I can't tell the truth in there to those kids. And that's what they want to hear, by the way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. We have a friend of ours, Tony Hoffman, who does very well doing just that thing, primarily high schools. And one had asked him, and he goes, "No, I'm sorry, I'm not going to soften my story." "Well, but we're going to pay you X amount of dollars. There's a nice decimal point and commas in there. No, I'm sorry, I don't need your money. I'm not going to come in there and lie."
Good for him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. How is that going to help? Kids can smell bullshit. Let's just be honest. Like,
Absolutely.
I remember seeing those things, and you're just looking, you're like, this is so far removed from reality of like what's going on. Like, you just start ignoring, you make fun of it. Like, everyone wears drug, dare shirts now, ironically, because they all remember it being a joke. Like, as they're getting hammered at like brunch or something like that. This is what's going on. And like, people don't get it. And, one of the major issues is that, because these drugs have been suppressed, and because they're labeled as controlled substances and controlled one substance and all this stuff, the lack of actual research that's been done on a lot of these drugs is so minimal that you actually can't really have public service announcements about these things, because there's no research about it, or they don't have the liability to they'd be liable if they just started talking out of something else. We're able to do this with alcohol, where you're talking about long-term liver cirrhosis and things like that. And we know a lot of the long-term damaging effects of the short-term ones. We just don't really know that with a lot of these other things, because of a lot of the laws and the way that the scheduling goes. It just really minimizes what actual outreach is feasible. So that's a huge problem too. It just continues to exacerbate on itself. And so we'll see, but that makes total sense to me. And it's crap, but that's a huge problem as well, that there's just not a lot of research that's able to be done and, discussed. It's a shame.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
So Greg, how do look, I've worked with Assemblyman Jim Patterson here for quite some time, going to Sacramento, trying to get some bills passed, or proposing bills to the state assembly, which get shot down almost immediately. In your opinion, what is it going to take to get in front of the powers that be? I just, it's almost like I'm look, I'm not going to quit. They're going to have to bury me under the orange tree in the backyard, okay, before I give up what I'm doing here. But I'll tell you what, I get frustrated. I'm sure you do. A bunch of us do in this, because the other side just isn't listening. Any suggestions?
I think you started to touch on it when you were talking about insurance agencies and how do we show to make this profitable. I don't think the win is going to come on some groundswell of evidence and overwhelming them with some rousing speech that occurs. I think it is going to be the shift in incentives that we have. It starts with law enforcement, shifting those incentives away from, battling the drug war in the way that we have been doing, just essentially looking for the lowest common denominator on packing up as many arrests as you can, not really worried about what happens on the back end. It's those types of things. But until you start to shift the incentives and drive people to want to help and shrink that population of what you're doing to the criminal justice system and kind of resource those dollars back into treatment and therapy, like I don't think anything's going to happen. That's what we need. How do you start to come up with a plan that says that in our society, it's going to be more profitable and more incentives to actually help treat addiction rather than kind of exacerbate the problem? Because that's what we're doing right now. There's really no incentive for, some, robust addiction services to come through the criminal justice system and laud it unless another actor says you're going to get this grant or this or that, or this is how we promote people within. It's going to be all those little things. Like, why are we driving people? Because mostly people are, good people in varying degrees. I don't think that, correctional officers are generally bad or police are bad or anything. They're just driven by incentives. And, I know if my boss is telling me to do a certain thing or go a certain route, I'm probably going to follow that to a long ways. And because I want to, get that bonus and get that promotion. And that's how we all act. And, that's how it's going to drive. I think that's what's going to change. Is the financial incentives within the drug war need to be shifted away and towards better things that actually are evidence-based and practical, and the things that you guys have been talking about. So obviously a very general answer, but that's as good as I have right now. It's what makes people tick, just like anything else, what makes people tick, and start to shift that. Yeah.
One of the incentives that when you were talking about that that again people don't understand is that when you go into an emergency room and with a broken leg, who knows what, a pain issue, their salaries are based on the patient's response to how did the staff do? Did they take care of your pain? That's why they will push to give you more pain pills, more this, a stronger one. They want to take care of your pain. That stupid little sign up there that says 0 to 10, what's your pain level? Okay, really? No, it's 50, asshole. Okay, it's not 10, but that's what doctors and nurses bonuses and a lot of those stuff is based on.
No, it is. And, on the flip side, we had a great talk with Maya Salvitz, who's another addiction expert. And she's talked about, how terminally ill cancer patients are getting opioid, prescriptions 30% less than they were. And it shows this drug war where we shift the other way because law enforcement has access to doctors' records, and people wouldn't realize this. They think HIPAA protects you, but doctors know. I mean, law enforcement can find out if you're being prescribed, opiates or something else that's a controlled substance. And now, if you're a doctor, you don't want to be at the top of that list, and so you start prescribing less. And they don't understand that people respond differently to opiates and might need something more at this point. And so now people aren't getting the pain treatment that they need because we shift the other way because we're going to start going after doctors and things like that. And it's, again, this just horrible back and forth swing that we have. And again, that's an incentive driver. A doctor wants to do good for their patient, unless it means that they're going to go in the back of a paddy wagon and lose their license, and so now they're incentivized not to treat this, patient with the proper response that they feel is right. So again, it just goes back and forth in how we drive incentives and how law enforcement and the criminal justice system, always uses a machete when we need a scalpel in a lot of these ways to kind of keep going back and forth. It's a shame. But anyway, yeah.
No, I'm telling you, this is one of the first conversations we've had where a guest has spoken what we've been talking about for a long time. I wrote a little something, I don't know, last week. We refused as a society to recognize, speaking of Appalachia and the Purdue pharma mess, we refused to even acknowledge that problem 25 years ago. 30 years ago. And now we're wondering why we have such an enormous problem with this. I mean, my God, we never really did even get that situation under control. That just moved up the mark, stronger drugs hitting the street. I mean, and I'm sure you've heard about ISO and niacin and some of those other drugs now that are out there, and great death. Now there's fentanyl mixed with methamphetamine. I mean, this, Jesus criminy, how much scarier does this have to get for everybody? That's what I don't get. Maybe I'm just a stupid old man. I don't know, but my God, it's enough.
Well, I guess I'm a stupider younger man. I don't know. I'm with you, man. I don't get it. And I don't understand how our responses, all we have seen is, like you said, a more intense drug come out there. And, it's kind of that iron law of prohibition. The more you prohibit this type of stuff, the more you suppress it, it's going to get stronger, deeper. Because, I remember going to Penn State football games. I'm a Penn State alum, and they didn't serve alcohol in the stadium. And so what did? We got drunker on the outside, and then we smuggled liquor in instead of, buying 2 beers for $8 in the stadium, which we probably would have done. And all you're seeing is, how can you say that anything about the drug war has been successful when more people are dying? We've had more drug arrests, more expansion of prisons, and the drugs are getting stronger. And they're getting cheaper now. And they're getting, it's fascinating. I mean, every metric that you could measure success right now is a failure, other than larger government expansion and enforcement. So I guess job well done. I don't know, but it's maddening. It's really maddening. So, that might be a part of why a lot of the education, the truth about this stuff doesn't get out, because a lot of it just shows a lot of failure at that level. And not a lot of people like to do a lot of self, have their review, their end of the year review done to the public like that. So I get it. But at the same time, it's really harming people and communities.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And I think you put it best, what was our basic econ in high school, right? When it comes to the drug dealers, it's just finding their equilibrium. And the more they can push it up higher and higher and higher, they will. It's like, hey, these pills, we're selling them for $1. They cost us $0.01 to make. oh, well, you take 2 million of them at the border. Ha, no big deal.
Right.
We got 10 million coming right behind it. And it's just, yeah.
It gets even crazier. I mean, as you all know, they literally, the cartels will literally drop, a dime on someone that they know
Yes.
to the CBP. They'll drop a dime and go, oh yeah, this guy's coming in at this hour. So
Right.
they nab him, and then someone with a quantity 10 times larger gets a
It's
funnel
coming
right
through
in.
the back
So
door. Right.
coming through the back door. I think a lot of folks, don't realize that most of the fentanyl coming in is actually coming through legal, security checkpoints too. This is not a lot. I mean, there's obviously smuggling going on, but most of it's coming through the ports of entry that you see the big cars lined up, and they come at certain times when it's rush hour and they want to go through all this type of stuff. And yeah, they'll say that guy's got a kilo on him. Okay, great. We'll nab him. And then here comes 15 more. And everyone gets to kind of go home and say success. And it's just another failure.
Yeah, it is. It just, like I said, it gets to the point where we think we're beating our heads up against the wall, and so a lot of times we have to think that one person at a time. If we can just help that one person at a time, then we've done our job for the day. And so some of us, we have to take some pride in that. But damn it, we get so tired of again, if even people in this industry, that are promoting, again, long-term harm reduction, they're saying, yeah, go ahead and stand as long as you don't die. Okay. As long as you don't die. And it's like, but what kind of life are they living? Let me tell you something, man. When you are in your addiction, like I was, and many others, it is a hell. It is a personal hell that nobody gets. Nobody gets it. And the only way I can explain it is if you're in bed at night and you're worried about getting your drugs the next day, and that clock says, and you look up all of a sudden because you're not sleeping, you're worried, you're starting to go through withdrawals a little bit, you don't know where you're going to get it the next day, and that clock hits midnight, right? And all of a sudden you go to sleep for a little bit, and you think you've slept for a couple of hours at least, and you wake up hoping that the sunlight is coming in, and you look at that clock and it's 12:01. That is hell that we're living in. What we have to go through I was taking upwards of 70 Vicodin every day for the last 2 years of my using. And this is even in the heyday where doctors were writing scripts all over the place. And I was forging prescriptions, and I was going to Mexico, bringing them back, doing all of it. But think about the 80 pills a day don't fall out of the sky. And I had a job. I worked for attorneys. I had a legal support service business. I worked for literally hundreds of law firms, serving subpoenas, summons and complaints, kick-out orders, divorce papers, whatever it was. I had to get that done, but I also had to get my 80 pills for the day.
Right.
Go into 2 doctors' offices, 3 doctors' offices, a walk-in clinic, an emergency room at 3:00 in the morning, blah, 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 on and on and on. It's hell. And society does not understand that. It's not something we want to do. It's something that we have to do. And if we don't start offering people the right kind of treatment and the right kind of message out there, it's never going to change. And what a shame for our country.
I agree. I think you put it beautifully, and people don't hear that very honest account of what an addict's day is and how horrible it is to themselves. I think a lot of people see it as, oh, they want to live on their own world of society and get high and be screw-offs. And I don't think they understand the personal hell that addicts go through, and just trying to get, people with $200, $300, $400 drug habits. You had a full function. Most people don't. So they're doing other things. And even if you don't care about the addict at all, you see what happens when you remove that when they're not dealing drugs, prostituting, doing everything else, just from the public safety standpoint, how much crime actually happens because of people just literally trying to maintain these addictions. Switzerland's a great example of that, where they just saw property crimes and burglaries drop, 60, 70% over a couple of years. It was fascinating. And, so even if you are just don't care, all you care about is the safety of your community and your city, having a different approach to this is going to be beneficial to you as well. And just I appreciate both of you being so open and honest. That's what it's going to take to actually hear and understand people who went through their own struggles, to understand this isn't glamorous. This isn't something that we want to go through. We are human beings struggling and hurting, and you're making us hurt more. And until you don't do that, it just I value your all's openness and sharing. Not everyone does that, so thank you. And thanks for having me. Yeah.
No, thank you, Greg.
I do want to say one thing before we go. Okay. Because you're a lawyer. All right. Yes. Right. All right.
I'm one of those. Yeah.
You're one of those. You're one of those guys. By the way, you paid my bills for a lot of years. Okay. So I speak in front of bar associations and different law firms and whatnot. So I remember speaking in front of the Federal Bar Association here in the San Joaquin Valley. And a lot of people knew me, right? I mean, because of what I did in the past. And I get up there, and, you can hear the glasses tinkling and the silverware, it was a luncheon, and, people kind of shuffling, but listening, right? But my opening line was to everybody there. I said, for those of you that know me, I said, I don't think that I really signed all those proofs of service. the clinking stopped.
That'll get you up. Yeah.
Right. I mean, everything came to a dead silence, and I said something like, "God, have you got any repercussion from any of that?"
Checking. Just want to check. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I finally went, "Nah, I gotcha. I actually signed them all, but it was under a different name."
Yeah. Just another pseudonym. Yeah.
Ironically, as Greg Glod.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I was wondering why I was disbarred in California. I wasn't even practicing law there.
There it is.
Yeah. I got this notice, and it was just
Greg, let people know where they can find the War on Drugs podcast with you and Clayton English.
Yeah, so the War on Drugs podcast is out everywhere you get podcasts, on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, wherever. The first 2 episodes are out. I think by the time you're listening to this, our 3rd one with Clayton and Eric Andre, who's a great actor and comedian who has an interesting story about policing and the war on drugs and civil asset forfeiture. So you're not going to want to miss that. And then you can also go to loveforgood.com, and our homepage is right there. Who's sponsoring our podcast and producing it. A lot of you have probably seen Bone Valley, which is kind of, just blowing up right now. And so they're the same people that produce that. And so it's always nice to be able to ride the coattails of an immensely successful true crime podcast, and ours is coming out. So really, really excited at that. But loveforgood.com, and you can find me on Twitter at Greg Glod. And I think those are the locations. I really appreciate y'all having me on here. And I hope y'all listen to the War on Drugs podcast. I'm really proud of the way it came out, and I think it's gonna be great and open up a lot of eyes for people. So yeah.
Wow. It is. It opened up a lot for me, and I kind of pride myself in being educated. So it's awesome to have that. But no, we appreciate you so much for what you do, and seriously, thank you, Greg.
Yeah, Greg, thanks, man. Yeah, this has been.
It was awesome talking to you, Flindt. Yeah, this is cool. Yeah,
man. Anytime you want to chat again, just let me know, man. I mean, look, and everybody knows this. I will go anywhere, do anything, talk to anybody, anytime, 7 days a week, 365 days a year about this thing. If you need me for anything, man, just get in touch with me. I'm more than happy to help.
I'd love to. One of the things we do is a lot of external, internal, education, and particularly on this issue. And I think someone like you that's gone through it has speaking to this crowd. I think both of y'all, I'll keep getting in touch with you guys. I think the work you're doing is important. So yeah, no, this will not be the last time, hopefully, that we chat for a while. I'd love to keep in touch and come back on at any point if you need me, and we'll just go from there.
If you or a loved one is struggling with addiction, please call Parents and Addicts in Need at 559-579-1551 or check us out online at painnonprofit.org. Follow us on social media at Pain Nonprofit. Please subscribe to the podcast and share with others wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. To donate, please click the link in the description and help us save more lives gripped by addiction. New Perceptions North, the premier drug and alcohol treatment and recovery center in Central California. A full continuum of medically supervised, top quality care with programs for detox, inpatient residential treatment with dual diagnosis, intensive outpatient treatment, sober living, support groups, and more. With 50 plus years of combined experience and sobriety, Flindt, Andersen, and Thelma Gatlin Wilson provide adult men and women with the highest caliber of professional health care, treating each client with compassion and respect, and a safe, comfortable environment. To begin the process of recovery, to proudly create and sustain a life without addiction, call 559-978-1507 or visit newperceptionsnorth.com.
This podcast contains the views and opinions of hosts and their guests to the show. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only. And because each person is sharing their unique perspective, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast and website are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate, we welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. Privacy is of the utmost importance to us. For those wishing anonymity, people, places, and scenarios mentioned in the podcast have been changed to protect confidentiality at the request of certain guests. This website or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or website. In no way does listening, reading, emailing, or interacting on social media with our content establish a doctor-patient relationship. If you find any errors in any of the content of this podcast or blogs, please send a message through the contact page.